Hey everyone. Tonight we step onto a battlefield, but not one marked by explosions. Instead, it's a field of laughter, confusion, and a slow unraveling of the human mind. In 1955, 17 British Royal Marines were sent on a simple training exercise. Their rifles were real. Their mission was real. But their minds weren't. Because in their canteens waited a single, invisible enemy, LSD. Within minutes, discipline dissolved into hysteria. Men forgot commands, talked to trees, and watched the sky ripple like water. Radios failed, not from static, but from uncontrollable laughter. Officers completely lost control. An entire unit gone. Without a single shot fired, what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a classified military film, buried for decades, showing what happens when science, war, and madness violently collide. So dim the lights, take a breath, and let's step into the field where the British Army truly lost its mind. You find yourself transported back to the mid-1950s, a time when the world held its breath, suspended between the chill of a new global conflict and the faint promise of a fragile, uneasy peace. The air hummed with unspoken tension, a deep-seated paranoia that settled like a fine dust over every government building, every family home, every quiet thought. You could almost hear the whispers of Cold War, a term that painted a stark, gray landscape of ideological battles fought not with conventional bullets, but with shadows and secrets, with scientific breakthroughs and psychological maneuvers. It was an era where the human mind itself became a new frontier for warfare, a battleground more subtle, yet potentially more devastating than any conventional front line. You feel this shift, this unsettling curiosity, as scientists and military strategists alike began to gaze inward, wondering if the greatest weapon wasn't steel and fire, but thought and perception itself. In this climate of scientific fever and military ambition, a new substance had emerged from the quiet halls of chemistry labs. Lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, was its name. A series of syllables that, at the time, held little meaning to the general public, but pulsed with immense potential within classified circles. You might imagine the hushed conversations, the speculative reports crossing the desks of high-ranking officials. A microscopic dose, they discovered, could warp perception, twist emotions, and entirely reshape an individual's reality. The very idea was intoxicating, a seductive whisper of control in a world that felt increasingly out of it. Scientists, driven by a blend of genuine curiosity and the pressing demands of national security, began to envision its applications. Could it be a truth serum, unlocking the deepest secrets of an enemy combatant? Could it be a tool for mind control, bending wills to their own design? Or, most chillingly, could it be a psychological weapon, crippling an entire unit without a single drop of blood being shed? Across the Atlantic, you hear echoes of the United States' own secretive endeavors, known only as Project MK Ultra, a shadow program delving into the dark arts of mind manipulation. But here, in Britain, a similar, parallel path was being forged, a series of trials cryptically dubbed Drugs and Discipline. The urgency for such exploration was further sharpened by real-world events. You can almost see the headlines, hear the radio reports detailing the ongoing EOK insurgency in Cyprus, where British forces were locked in a grinding struggle against guerrilla fighters. This conflict, far from the grand battlefields of old, highlighted the psychological toll of prolonged, irregular warfare. spurred military minds to study human behavior under extreme chaos, to understand the breaking point, and perhaps to find a way to accelerate it in their adversaries. And so, the stage was set for an extraordinary, almost unbelievable experiment. 17 healthy, highly disciplined volunteers were selected from a Royal Marines troop, young men in the prime of their lives, trained to a peak of efficiency, dedicated to their duty. You can picture them, unaware of the profound historical moment they were stepping into. Their faces eager, their postures squared. The official objective, as presented to them, was deceptively benign: to test performance under altered perception. A perfectly reasonable goal for an army always seeking an edge. But beneath this surface, the unofficial, unspoken goal was far more audacious, far more unsettling: to explore chemical methods of neutralizing enemy soldiers, to render them harmless, not with force, but with confusion. You watch as cameras are meticulously placed, their lenses poised to capture every detail, every nuanced shift. These men, these unwitting participants, were about to become the subjects of history's strangest war film, a silent, flickering record of an army losing its grip on reality. All while the lenses rolled on, capturing a quiet, internal apocalypse. Imagine the crispness of the morning air on that first day, a subtle chill still lingering from the night, quickly giving way to the gentle warmth of the rising sun. You are there, observing, as the Royal Marines gather, their movements precise, almost ritualistic. The camp awakens with the familiar sounds of military routine: the soft clatter of equipment, the low murmur of voices, the rhythmic scraping of boots on gravel. This is day one, designated as the control exercise, a vital benchmark against which the following day's chaos would be measured. Every soldier is a picture of readiness, their rifles cleaned to a gleaming perfection, their uniforms immaculate, their rations packed with an almost obsessive attention to detail. You can almost feel the weight of their prepared gear, the cool metal of their canteens, filled with nothing more than pure, clear water. Their mission for the day is clearly articulated, devoid of any mystery. They are to move tactically through the designated training woods, a familiar landscape of rustling leaves and dappled sunlight. Their objectives are precise: capture terrorists represented by dummies or mock targets, recover hidden supplies, navigate the terrain with unwavering focus. You observe their posture, straight and unwavering, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line, anticipating, assessing. Each section of the troop executes its maneuvers with a practiced grace, a synchronized dance of vigilance and readiness. You can almost hear the sharp, clipped commands, resonating with authority, and witness the immediate, instinctual reactions that follow. Hand signals, barely perceptible, convey complex instructions with silent efficiency. The footage from this day, now an archival whisper, captured a machine of perfect coordination. You see the seamless advance, the strategic covering fire, the quick, almost fluid transitions between positions. There is no hesitation in their movements, no stray glances, no idle chatter. Their faces, though strained by exertion, reflect an unwavering focus, a calm determination. The troop commander, a man whose authority rests on years of rigorous training and proven leadership, moves among them, his gaze sharp, approving. Later, you would hear his praise for their timing, their alertness, their unwavering dedication to the task at hand. It was a flawless demonstration of military efficiency, a testament to months, even years, of disciplined training. There was no laughter on this day, no confusion, no sign of anything amiss, only order, a meticulously crafted structure of obedience and tactical prowess. This was the before picture, the solid ground of reality from which everything would soon diverge. You watched them as they returned to base that evening, tired but satisfied, their mission accomplished, their minds clear. They shower, eat, and prepare for another day, anticipating the same challenges, the same routine. They do not know, as they drift off to sleep, that the next morning would bring a subtle, invisible change. The same terrain, the same orders, but the water in their canteens, the very source of life and hydration, would contain a single, unseen drop, a molecule that would melt their discipline like wax, transforming their world into an entirely different, unsettling reality by noon. The air of peaceful slumber would soon give way to an awakening that would ripple through their very perceptions, forever altering the memory of that quiet camp. As the sun climbed higher on day 2, casting long, lazy shadows across the training grounds, the rhythm of the morning felt indistinguishable from the day before. You are there again, observing, feeling the subtle difference in the air, a warmth that promised a sweltering day ahead. The soldiers, still crisp in their uniforms, went through the familiar motions of preparation. Rifles were checked, gear adjusted, and the call for water rang out, a common requirement under the burgeoning heat. To prevent dehydration, they were told, a simple, necessary command that stirred no suspicion, no flicker of doubt in their well-trained minds. You watch as they line up, each man reaching for his canteen, the familiar cool weight of the metal in his hand. You can almost taste the water as they drink, feeling it refresh and revive them. It's just water. Isn't it pure and ordinary? But within each swallow, an invisible passenger began its journey, a single, unseen drop of lysergic acid diethylamide, carefully introduced, dissolved silently, innocuously. None suspected a thing. Why would they? The day was hot, the orders routine, the trust in their commanders absolute. They drank, capped their canteens, and geared up, the clink of metal and canvas a steady cadence as they prepared to move out. You follow them as they step into the training woods, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. The scent of pine and damp earth fills the air, a smell of normalcy. For the first 20 minutes, you observe nothing out of the ordinary. Their posture remained disciplined, their pace steady, their eyes alert, scanning the environment just as they had on day 1. The commands were given, the formations held, the tactical movements executed with precision. It was as if the world was holding its breath, a quiet, pregnant pause before the storm. You might even begin to wonder if the experiment had failed, if the invisible agent had somehow lost its potency. Then, you see it. A subtle shift, almost imperceptible at first. A faint smile on one soldier's face that slowly widened, blooming into an uncontrolled chuckle. He tries to suppress it. You can tell, a trained response to maintain decorum. But the laughter bursts forth, loud and uncontrollable. It's a strange, almost musical sound, utterly out of place in the disciplined silence of the woods. You watch as another man, moments later, drops his rifle. Not out of fatigue, not out of clumsiness, but as if the weight of it suddenly seemed irrelevant, or perhaps too heavy to bear, as his gaze fixated on the trees. He stares, wide-eyed, captivated, as if the bark of the ancient oak before him was not static wood, but a living, breathing entity, its leaves swaying with a silent rhythm only he could perceive. Laughter, once an anomaly, now spreads like wildfire through the troop. It's a viral infection of absurd, inexplicable joy, bubbling up from within, uncontrollable and infectious. Officers, initially, assume fatigue, or perhaps a lapse into jocularity, a release of tension that would quickly be reined in. You can sense their mild irritation, their attempts to restore order with sharp words and stern looks. But they have no idea. They are completely unaware that LSD, the invisible guest, has begun to take hold, weaving its potent spell through the minds of their men. Within minutes, perception itself begins to twist. Sounds deepen, reverberating with an unnatural intensity, as if the forest itself is humming a low, resonant tune. Colors shimmer and bleed, the greens of the leaves, the browns of the earth. Suddenly vibrant, pulsating with an inner light. The very ground beneath their feet might have felt spongy, alive, breathing. These men, unknowingly, had crossed an invisible line. The boundary between discipline and delirium had dissolved, replaced by a swirling, kaleidoscopic descent into the unknown. Barely 30 minutes had passed since that first unexpected burst of laughter, yet the transformation was already profound, chilling in its speed. You observed the troop, once a cohesive unit, now a scattered collection of individuals, their formation broken apart like shards of glass. Discipline, that bedrock of military life, had simply evaporated, replaced by a bewildered, almost childlike wonder. Soldiers wandered aimlessly, their earlier precision replaced by a meandering gait, their faces alight with giggles, or sometimes a deep, unsettling concentration. The training woods, once a familiar landscape, had become a surreal stage for their unfolding inner dramas. You watch, captivated and perhaps a little horrified, as one Marine kneels before a rugged boulder, his eyes wide, his expression earnest. He begins to speak to it, his voice hushed, as if confiding in an old friend. "You are a sentry in disguise, aren't you?" he murmurs, convinced that the inanimate rock held a conscious presence, a silent guardian of the forest. Nearby, another soldier lies prostrate on the damp earth, his ear pressed to the ground. He isn't listening for approaching footsteps. He is listening for something far more elemental, far more profound. "I can feel the heartbeat of the earth," he whispers, his face serene, lost in a communion with the very ground beneath him. The troop commander, his voice still edged with authority despite the growing unease, shouts orders into the swirling chaos. "Reform, maintain formation, advance." His words, once absolute commands, now seem to simply drift, unheard, or perhaps merely misinterpreted as part of the grand, unfolding spectacle. The only reply that echoes through the sun-dappled woods is a chorus of laughter, a disconcerting sound that seems to mock his very efforts. The very air seems to vibrate with their mirth, a strange, infectious joy that only deepens the sense of disorientation. Radio contact, a lifeline in any military operation, disintegrated completely. You witness the operator, his face flushed, his eyes glazed with an inner vision, fumbling with the controls. He had forgotten the code, forgotten the very purpose of the device. Instead of relaying vital information, he simply kept laughing into the microphone, his mirth broadcasting across the frequencies. A bizarre transmission of pure, unadulterated absurdity. The rocket launcher team, once a symbol of destructive power, became a spectacle of comic futility. They fired wildly, aiming at nothing in particular, the rockets soaring into the sky with a whoosh, missing everything. And then, as the smoke dispersed, they would simply laugh, delighted by the explosive burst of color and sound, seeing it as part of a grand, meaningless show. Maps, those tools of objective reality and precise navigation, became living objects in their hands. You might see a soldier tracing a line, not as a path, but as a river of light, or debating with a comrade about where they were in the universe. The familiar contours of the terrain, now a cosmic labyrinth. One soldier, perhaps seeking a different vantage point on this newly warped world, climbed high into a sturdy tree. He refused to come down, his voice carrying down through the leaves, explaining, with utmost seriousness, that he needed to watch the colors move, seeing the very air shimmer with unseen hues. In less than an hour, a trained, disciplined fighting force had dissolved into a troop of dreamers and jesters. The battlefield, once a place of serious intent, had become a playground of hallucination, a realm where the mind's inner landscape overshadowed all external realities. And you, the observer, can only watch as order completely gives way to an almost poetic madness. By 11:55, a mere 40 minutes into the active phase of the experiment, the chaos had reached its zenith, and the invisible enemy had begun to claim its most crucial target. You observe the troop commander, the man once synonymous with control and authority. His posture now slumped, his face pale. A creeping dizziness had begun to cloud his vision, a wave of nausea washing over him, signaling that the LSD had reached even him, the steadfast leader. The very ground beneath his feet might have felt soft and yielding, as if the earth itself had lost its solidity. He tried to issue orders, to cut through the cacophony of giggles and bewildered murmurs, but the words stumbled from his lips, broken and incoherent, stripped of their usual power. His tongue felt thick, his thoughts fragmented, as if his mind were a jigsaw puzzle scattered by an unseen hand. In the midst of this spreading disarray, you witnessed two section leaders converge in the forest, their usual confidence eroded by the bewildering circumstances. Their eyes, once sharp and decisive, now darted uncertainly. They exchanged glances, a silent, almost desperate question passing between them. But neither was willing, or perhaps even able, to seize command. The concept of leadership, of taking charge, seemed alien, irrelevant in this dreamlike state. What good was authority when reality itself was melting? Around them, the soldiers engaged in strange, meandering conversations. You hear fragments of philosophical debates, voices questioning who they really were, their identities suddenly fluid, debatable. The very foundations of self seemed to have dissolved, replaced by an existential curiosity that was deeply unsettling in a military context. One man, with a profound seriousness, dug at a tree root, not to unearth a hidden object, but because it was whispering to him, its gnarled tendrils conveying secrets only he could discern. The world had become animate, imbued with sentience, and these men were listening, truly listening, to its newfound voices. The surreal nature of the situation intensified when the mock enemy, still operating under the pretense of a training exercise, threw a thunder flash. The sudden, loud bang, meant to simulate an explosion, would ordinarily elicit a rapid, tactical response, ducking for cover, assessing threats, returning fire. But in this altered reality, only one Marine reacted, and his response was utterly farcical. Instead of a defensive maneuver, he tackled the mock enemy with the wild abandon of a clown in a circus act, transforming a serious engagement into a moment of pure, absurd physical comedy. The sight was both tragic and darkly humorous, a stark illustration of how completely the framework of military training had disintegrated. Finally, the commander, his spirit broken, his voice barely a whisper, muttered the words that sealed the experiment's fate. "I can't control them. I can't do anything." His admission hung in the air, a concession not to an external foe, but to the overwhelming internal force that had overtaken his men and himself. With that declaration, the exercise completely dissolved. There was no more pretense of training, no more attempts at order. Men drifted away, their laughter mingling with occasional, bewildered cries, some still talking to unseen companions, to ghosts that only they could perceive in the dappled light of the forest. A whole unit, a fighting force honed to perfection, was disabled, not by fear, not by superior firepower, but by perception itself, by a few invisible molecules that had utterly rearranged their minds. The experiment had proven, with terrifying clarity, what no bullet, no bomb, could ever achieve: the complete, non-violent neutralization of an entire military force. The command to withdraw, a call to retreat from the now irrelevant training ground, was met with utter incomprehension, a blank, bewildered stare from the disoriented Marines. You observe, helpless, as the soldiers, their minds still adrift in the swirling currents of hallucination, simply did not obey. The very trucks sent to retrieve them, those familiar, sturdy vehicles that had transported them countless times, now seemed to transform before their eyes. They appeared alive, perhaps pulsating with strange colors, their engines growling like monstrous beasts. You can almost feel the instinctive fear that gripped some of the men as they perceived these machines as predatory entities. Instead of boarding, they scattered, melting into the dense underbrush, hiding in the bushes like frightened animals, convinced the ambulance was some fearsome mechanical monster come to snatch them away. Others, less prone to fear and more to a blissful detachment, crawled slowly through the grass, their bodies moving with an ethereal grace. They spoke in hushed, wonder-filled tones, declaring that they were floating in air, their limbs light, their connection to the earth seemingly severed. The ground itself might have felt like a soft cloud beneath them, the blades of grass like shimmering threads of light. Medical officers, dispatched to assist in the retrieval, watched helplessly, their faces a mixture of concern and bewilderment. They were trained to handle physical wounds, to mend broken bones. But how could one treat a mind that had simply unraveled? Discipline had vanished completely, leaving behind only the raw, unfiltered experience of a consciousness untethered from reality. After much gentle persuasion, a process that felt more like coaxing lost children than commanding trained soldiers, the men were eventually loaded into the vehicles. You might imagine the difficulty guiding a man who sees the truck's bench as a wave, or who insists the steering wheel is a giant, glowing eye. The journey back to base was filled with the same surreal, unsettling atmosphere. Once at the hospital, the strange detachment continued. You see them lying on the beds, some still giggling softly, their eyes wide with wonder, describing walls that could breathe, their surfaces rippling and shifting with an inner life. The familiar white plaster might have pulsed with unseen veins, the paint colors blooming into intricate, moving tapestries. The troop commander, still under the drug's influence, lay staring at the ceiling, his mind a canvas for geometric patterns that moved and evolved in mesmerizing 3D motion. His gaze was fixed, his expression a mixture of awe and profound exhaustion, as if he were watching a cosmic light show projected directly onto his consciousness. 2 hours later, the hallucinations persisted with undiminished intensity. Reality remained stubbornly fluid, a landscape of ever-shifting forms and colors. It was a relentless, 6-hour journey into total mental chaos, a period marked by an absence of aggression, a complete lack of awareness of their surroundings or their duties, and an overwhelming, all-consuming confusion. You realized, with a chilling clarity, that one of the strongest armies in Europe had been utterly undone, not by an enemy's might, but by a few invisible molecules, rendering them vulnerable and lost in the labyrinth of their own minds. The silence of the hospital room, punctuated only by their soft murmurs and occasional laughter, spoke volumes about the sheer, disarming power of this unseen chemical weapon. As the first faint light of dawn began to paint the sky, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift started to settle over the hospital rooms. You witnessed the slow, gradual return of the Marines from their profound internal journeys. The vibrant, pulsating hallucinations began to recede, colors softening, sounds regaining their normal timbre. Exhaustion, deep and pervasive, settled over them like a heavy blanket, a testament to the immense mental exertion they had undergone. Yet, remarkably, they were physically unharmed. No injuries, no lingering physical ailments, only the profound weariness of minds that had traveled to the very edges of perception. You might hear their hushed voices, tentative at first, then growing more confident as they tried to articulate the ineffable. Some described the trip as the most beautiful thing they'd ever seen. A profound, almost spiritual experience that transcended the mundane. Their eyes, though tired, still held a trace of that otherworldly wonder. The commander had too slowly resurfaced, his gaze, once fixed on geometric patterns, now settled back into the room, though a distant, thoughtful look remained. I saw everything moving, he would later recount, his voice quiet, reflective, and I felt strangely happy. It was a happiness divorced from external circumstances, a peculiar, unbidden joy born from the sheer spectacle of a mind unleashed. Despite the profound, temporary incapacitation, their physical recovery was swift. On day 3, the very next morning, they repeated the same training exercise in the woods, completely sober this time, and you watch as they execute it flawlessly, with the same precision and efficiency they had demonstrated on day 1. The mission, which had dissolved into madness just 24 hours prior, was now completed in a mere 3 hours, as if nothing untoward had ever happened. It was a startling testament to their inherent training and discipline, a swift snap back to reality that defied the recent chaos. Yet, the memory of the previous day lingered, a ghost in their minds. The echoes of the laughter, The disorienting confusion, the shimmering, impossible colors. These sensations, though no longer active, had etched themselves into their consciousness. They had glimpsed a world beyond the ordinary. And that experience, however brief, could not be entirely forgotten. Psychologists, observing and documenting every detail, concluded with stark clarity a single dose of LSD could annihilate an entire unit's discipline and effectiveness within 60 minutes. It was, in its purest form, a perfect psychological weapon, capable of disabling an enemy without any physical harm. However, the very nature of its power revealed its fatal flaw. It was impossible to control. The experience was too subjective, too unpredictable, leading to a spectrum of reactions from blissful wonder to profound confusion. You understand the implications in the rigid, calculated world of warfare. Unpredictability is death, and LSD, in its essence, was chaos incarnate, a force that could not be harnessed, only unleashed. The insights gained were profound, but the practical application was a terrifying paradox, a tool too powerful, too wild, to ever be safely wielded on the battlefield. The calm, scientific assessment confirmed what the harrowing experience had shown the human mind. When tampered with, became an uncontrollable wilderness. As the immediate aftermath settled and the sobering conclusions were drawn, a decision was made, swift and absolute, to bury the truth. You can almost feel the weight of the silence that descended upon this extraordinary experiment. The raw, unsettling footage. Those 16mm film reels capturing the soldiers' descent into laughter and bewilderment, along with all the meticulously detailed reports, were immediately sealed, classified, deemed too sensitive, too unpredictable, too revealing of a vulnerability no military wished to acknowledge. The Ministry of Defense, with a cold, bureaucratic finality, labeled it unfit for military use, extreme unpredictability. The experiment, in its unique and unsettling form, was never repeated. Britain, with quiet resolve, simply buried the evidence, filing it away into the deep, dark corners of its archives, hoping it would never see the light of day. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the United States continued its own shadowy investigations under Project MK Ultra, exploring the very same frontiers of the mind, albeit with different methodologies and, in many cases, far more ethically questionable means. LSD, though rejected by the military as a weapon, found its own strange path. You watch as, years later, it would leak from the classified labs and into the burgeoning counterculture movements of the 1960s, influencing art, music, and social thought, becoming a symbol of rebellion and altered consciousness rather than a tool of warfare. The very drug that had undone a military unit in secret would, in time, help define an entire generation. But for decades, the film reels from the British experiment gathered dust in the cold, silent archives, a forgotten testament to a secret war waged on consciousness itself. They lay dormant, unseen, until the passage of time and the gradual shift in government transparency led to their declassification, when they were finally released, slowly, cautiously, to a world vastly different from the one in which they were filmed. The reaction was profound. The world was stunned. You can imagine the disbelief, the shock, as people saw the flickering images British soldiers in full battle gear, laughing uncontrollably, talking to trees, their discipline shattered without a single shot fired. It was an image that defied every expectation of military might and order. Historians, sifting through the newly revealed documents and viewing the eerie footage, began to piece together the narrative. They would eventually label it, with a mixture of awe and grim understanding, the day the British Army lost its mind. The film became more than just a historical curiosity. It transformed into a grim lesson in hubris, a stark warning against the dangerous temptation to control the human mind by breaking it. A journalist, moved by the sheer audacity and strangeness of the events, later wrote with a poetic poignancy, "This was the Queen's Army, inside an acid dream." You feel the weight of that statement, the profound irony. Britain, a nation with a storied military history, had, in a moment of intense Cold War paranoia, waged war not on an external enemy, but on the very consciousness of its own soldiers, seeking control and finding only chaos. Today, the raw, unedited footage of that extraordinary day survives. You can find it, a flickering ghost from a forgotten era, nestled among countless other videos on platforms like YouTube. It's an eerie spectacle, mesmerizing in its strangeness, and profoundly unsettling in its implications. You might scroll through, pausing on a grainy thumbnail, then click play, inviting yourself to bear witness to a moment of historical absurdity. The low-quality 16mm film, with its muted colors and subtle crackle, somehow enhances its otherworldliness. You see the faces, at first bewildered, then euphoric, then lost, and you hear the laughter, that persistent, echoing laughter that once filled the quiet training woods. Viewers, much like yourself, often react in layers. Initially, there might be a chuckle, a nervous giggle at the sheer absurdity of soldiers talking to rocks or firing rockets into the air with childlike abandon. But then, as the full weight of what you are seeing sinks in, a shiver runs down your spine. You begin to realize how thin the line truly is between order and madness, between a meticulously constructed reality and a world utterly unraveled by a single chemical key. It forces a contemplation of your own perception, how easily it could be manipulated, how fragile the edifice of sanity can be. Historians and cultural commentators continue to pore over this film, finding in its frames a profound insight into an era obsessed with mastering the human psyche. You hear their analyses, their measured voices explaining that the experiment was a product of its time, a desperate attempt to gain an advantage in a Cold War, where psychological warfare was as potent as nuclear arsenals. It revealed, with stark clarity, a fundamental truth: the battlefield is not only out there, a physical space of conflict, but also deep inside the brain, within the delicate machinery of consciousness itself. LSD, that powerful, unpredictable compound, would indeed go on to touch countless lives in the decades that followed. Doctors explored its potential in therapy, seeking to unlock repressed memories or treat mental illness. Spies, in covert operations, experimented with it as a truth serum or a tool for disorientation. Artists and musicians embraced it as a muse, a gateway to new forms of creativity and perception. But never again, after that infamous day in 1950s Britain, would it be seriously considered for military use on soldiers. You feel the weight of that finality. The lesson learned at such a strange, almost comical cost. The experiment, a collision of science and war, ultimately produced something profoundly absurd. A spectacle of human vulnerability that defied all military logic. The final, stark conclusion, reiterated in the declassified reports, still resonates with chilling simplicity. Within 60 minutes, an entire unit ceased to function. It was a psychological weapon that required no bullet, no blood, no physical force, only a chemical whisper that disarmed the mind, transforming soldiers into dreamers. The film, this ghostly record, stands as an enduring warning control. When pushed to its absolute limit, can destroy the very thing it seeks to command. And somewhere, in that field of laughter, beneath the rustling leaves of the training woods, the British Army discovered the most terrifying weapon of all the immeasurable, unpredictable, and ultimately unconquerable human mind itself. As the echoes of that strange, historical laughter fade into the quiet expanse of your mind, you are left with a lingering sense of awe, a profound realization of the intricate dance between order and chaos within us all. The journey into that secret history, guided by the flickering images of a long-buried film, leaves you contemplating the delicate balance of perception. It reminds you that the ground beneath our feet, the sounds that fill our ears, the sights that capture our eyes, these are not merely external realities, but are constantly filtered, interpreted, and constructed by the intricate machinery of our own minds. The story of the British Marines and their accidental voyage into an LSD-induced dream is more than just a peculiar military anecdote. It's a parable whispered across decades, a testament to the fragile nature of our conscious experience. You reflect on the inherent human desire for control, especially in the face of uncertainty and conflict. This experiment, born from a desperate need to gain an edge in a world of shadows and Cold War tensions, ultimately revealed the futility of attempting to master the inner landscape of the mind with external force. What was meant to be a tool of strategic advantage became a demonstration of profound vulnerability, turning a troop of disciplined men into a collective poem of the absurd. And so, you carry this knowledge, this quiet understanding, into your own present moment. You appreciate the stability of your own perceptions, the seamless continuity of your reality, recognizing it as a precious and often unacknowledged gift. The calm, soothing voice of history murmurs its final warning control. When it becomes an obsession, can indeed dismantle the very structures it seeks to uphold. It reminds us that there are forces within the human experience, within the vast, uncharted territories of consciousness, that defy rigid classification, that resist all attempts at absolute command. The quiet understanding settles within you the true strength, and indeed, the true terror, lies not in the weapons we wield, nor in the strategies we devise, but in the boundless, untamed wilderness of the human mind itself. And perhaps, as the night deepens around you, you might close your eyes and imagine the gentle rustle of leaves in that long-ago training ground, carrying with it the faint, echoing sound of laughter, a timeless whisper of what happens when the mind is set free, even for a moment, from its moorings in the ordinary world. And in that quiet reflection, you realize the story is not truly over, but continues to unfold. A silent lesson in the enduring mystery of who we are and how profoundly we perceive the world around us.